The Nexus Cantina was the kind of place where legends went to drink and brag. It floated somewhere between dimensions, a massive structure that looked like someone had mixed a medieval tavern with a space station and added way too many glowing crystals. The air itself seemed to sparkle with magic and technology nobody quite understood anymore. Tonight, like every night for the past 1,000 years, the bar was packed with beings that considered themselves gods. In one corner, a dragon the size of a small building was telling anyone who would listen about the time he'd eaten an entire moon. His scales shifted colors as he talked, probably showing off. Near the bar, something that looked like a walking constellation was complaining about how boring it was to be immortal these days. The newest topic of conversation was making everyone laugh. Humans, those weird little creatures from the edge of the galaxy who had just figured out how to travel faster than light. Most species took centuries to develop that technology. Humans had done it in less than 50 years after splitting the atom. It was either impressive or terrifying, depending on who you asked. Did you hear what they called themselves? Wheezed a being made entirely of what looked like purple fog. Homo sapiens, wise man. The irony is delicious. I heard they still fight wars over pieces of colored cloth, added another creature that resembled a floating jellyfish with too many eyes. And they poison their own air for fun. The laughter grew louder. These immortal beings had seen thousands of species rise and fall. They'd watched civilizations bloom and die like flowers in a cosmic garden. To them, humans were just another amusing accident that would burn itself out in a few centuries. Then the cantina doors opened. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It took a moment for the immortals to notice the small group of figures walking through the entrance. They looked so ordinary compared to the cosmic beings around them. 5 humans in simple dark uniforms, moving with the kind of quiet confidence that came from facing down the impossible on a regular Tuesday. Leading them was a woman with short black hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Commander Hannah Kim had the kind of face that looked friendly until you crossed her. Then it became the last thing you wanted to see. Her left arm caught the light strangely, metal and plastic disguised to look almost natural. Behind her walked Jin-Ho Park, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but somehow managed to project calm anyway. His job was keeping the team alive through diplomacy, which mostly meant knowing when to smile and when to run. The immortals slowly fell, silent as the humans approached their table. It was like watching ants walk up to a group of giants. Amusing, but also slightly unsettling. These creatures had somehow made it to their private club, which shouldn't have been possible. "Well, well," said the energy being, its voice crackling like a poorly tuned radio. "Look what crawled out of the galactic backwater. The famous humans. Up close." The being was even more unsettling. It had no solid form, just crackling electricity and plasma shaped roughly like a person. When it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around the edges. This was something that had been around since the universe was young, something that remembered when stars were first learning how to shine. "I am Voltex the Eternal," it continued, somehow managing to sound smug despite having no actual mouth. "I have witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. I have seen species rise to greatness and fall to dust. And now I get to meet the latest comedy act." The other immortals chuckled. This was going to be entertaining. Hannah looked around the table, taking in each being carefully. The massive dragon with its shifting scales, the floating jellyfish creature, with its dozens of blinking eyes, the purple fog being that seemed to be made of living smoke, the crystal entity that hummed with harmonic frequencies, and Voltex, crackling with barely contained cosmic energy. "Commander Hannah Kim, Terran Diplomatic Corps," she said simply. Her voice was steady, professional, and completely unimpressed. "Diplomatic Corps." The dragon's laughter was like an earthquake. "What could you possibly have to discuss with us? Do you want to surrender now and save us all some time?" "Actually," Hannah said, "I heard you all like to make bets." The cantina went quiet. Even the background music seemed to pause. Betting was serious business among immortals. It was one of the few things that could still surprise them after millions of years of existence. "What kind of bet?" asked the jellyfish creature, its many eyes focusing on Hannah with sudden interest. "Simple," Hannah replied. "You think humans are weak, pathetic, not worth your time." She paused, letting that sink in. Prove it. Voltex leaned forward, his energy form crackling with amusement. Oh, this should be good. What do you propose, little human? Arm wrestling, Hana said casually. You versus me, right here, right now. The laughter that erupted from the Immortals was loud enough to shake the cantina's crystal fixtures. The dragon actually fell off his chair, which was impressive since he was roughly the size of a city bus. Arm wrestling. Voltex could barely contain his glee. You want to arm wrestle a being made of pure cosmic energy? Child, I could disintegrate you with a thought. But you won't, Hana said confidently, because that would prove you're scared of a fair fight. The word scared hit the Immortals like a slap. They hadn't been scared of anything in so long they'd forgotten what it felt like. The idea that a human might make them afraid was both insulting and strangely intriguing. Hana turned to Jinho and held out her drink. It was something blue and fizzy that the bartender had insisted was popular with carbon-based life forms. Hold? My beer. Jinho took the glass with the resigned expression of someone who'd been through this before. Hana, are you sure about this? Trust me, she said with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. What happened next would be talked about in the Nexus Cantina for the next 1,000 years. Hana placed her prosthetic arm on the table across from Voltex's crackling energy form. The moment their hands touched, reality hiccuped. The hidden static generator in Hana's prosthetic arm activated, channeling every ounce of electrical charge in the area directly into the contest. But it wasn't just technology that won the day. It was pure, stubborn human determination, the kind of bloody-minded refusal to quit that had gotten humans from caves to starships in less time than most species took to discover fire. Voltex's form flickered as his energy was redirected, channeled, and ultimately overpowered by the sheer force of human will backed by clever engineering. His confident crackling became confused static, then desperate buzzing, and finally, silence. His energy form collapsed onto the table in defeat. Every single drink in the cantina instantly turned to water. The eldest dragon, a creature so old. He remembered when the universe was half its current age, stared at the spreading puddle of plain water where his 1,000-year-old cosmic wine had been moments before. His ancient eyes widened with a terror that hadn't touched them in eons. The warning, he whispered, his voice shaking the entire cantina. By the void, the warning has been triggered. Hana stood up, flexing her fingers casually. She looked down at the defeated Voltex, then around at the stunned faces of the other Immortals. I'll take that tab now, she said with perfect calm. Thanks. The silence in the Nexus Cantina stretched like a held breath. Every immortal being stared at the puddles of water that had once been their precious drinks. The dragon's words about a triggered warning hung in the air like a death sentence nobody wanted to understand. Finally, the Immortals began to move. But instead of their usual arrogant swagger, they huddled together like scared children. HFY dawned. Beings who had witnessed the birth of stars were whispering frantically to each other, their voices filled with something they hadn't felt in millions of years, genuine fear. The dragon, still the largest presence in the room despite his terror, gestured with one massive claw toward a figure that had been sitting quietly in the shadows. Wu Jin Li, he rumbled, you speak for the tribunal now. Wu Jin Li stepped forward, and Hana immediately understood why the Immortals had chosen him as their spokesman. Unlike the others, he looked almost human, though something about his perfect features and the way light seemed to bend around him suggested he was anything but. He wore simple robes that somehow managed to look both ancient and timeless. Commander Kim, Wu Jin said, his voice carrying the weight of eons, what you have done tonight has consequences you cannot imagine. Try me, Hana replied, not moving, from where she stood beside the still flickering form of the defeated Voltex. Wu Jin's composure was impressive, but Hana could see the cracks. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes kept darting to the water puddles as if they might transform back into alcohol through sheer willpower. There are rules, he continued, ancient laws that govern the relationship between mortals and immortals. Tonight, you have broken something that has held steady for over 1 billion years. Good, Hana said simply. The word hit the Immortals like a physical blow. Several of them actually stepped backward. The jellyfish creature's many eyes blinked in rapid succession, and the purple fog being seemed to be trying to make itself smaller. Wu Jin took a deep breath that he probably didn't need. Very well. Since you have triggered the ancient protocols, we are bound by cosmic law to offer you a chance to prove your species' worth through trial by achievement. Meaning? A wager, the dragon interrupted, his voice still shaky but gaining strength. The oldest form of cosmic justice, your species against our judgment. Wu Jin shot the dragon a look that could have melted steel but continued. Humanity will have exactly one solar cycle, one full year as you measure time, to accomplish something that has never been achieved in the entire history of the universe. The cantina erupted in nervous laughter from the Immortals. This was safer ground. This was something they understood. In all their millions of years, they had never seen any species accomplish something truly unprecedented. The universe was old, and everything that could be done had been done. And if we succeed, Hana asked, you gain a permanent seat on the Cosmic Council, Wu Jin replied. Full recognition as a species worthy of immortal status, access to technologies and knowledge beyond your current understanding. And if we fail? Wu Jin's perfect features hardened. Your species will be confined to your solar system for the remainder of your existence. No FTL travel, no contact with other worlds. You will live and die on the worlds you currently inhabit, and when your sun burns out, that will be the end. Of humanity. The terms hung in the air like a blade. It was the kind of all-or-nothing gamble that could save or damn an entire species. Most civilizations would have begged for mercy or tried to negotiate. Hana smiled. Deal, she said without hesitation. The Immortals blinked in surprise. They had expected pleading, bargaining, maybe even tears. They hadn't expected immediate acceptance of what was essentially a death sentence. You don't understand. The crystal being chimed in harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. We're talking about something never before accomplished in 13 billion years of universal history. The odds are literally astronomical. Lady, Hana said, turning to face the crystal entity. My species went from horse-drawn carriages to walking on the moon in less than 70 years. We split the atom and then used it to boil water. We invented a global communication network and immediately used it to share pictures of cats. Don't lecture us about astronomical odds. As the Immortals began drafting the formal cosmic contract, that would bind both sides to the wager. Hana felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Memories she usually kept locked away began to surface. 3 years ago, the Kepler colony, a raid by slavers from the Void Empire, being so evil that even most Immortals considered them distasteful. The colony's distress signals had reached not just Earth, but several Immortal monitoring stations. Help could have arrived in minutes, but the Immortals had debated, was humanity worth saving? Were they developed enough to deserve intervention? The discussion had lasted exactly long enough for every human on Kepler colony to die, including Hana's daughter Minji, who had been teaching children at the colony school. When the Immortals finally decided that perhaps they should help, they found only empty buildings and scattered bones. Their official report called it an unfortunate tragedy and suggested that humans should develop better defensive capabilities before expanding beyond their home system. Hana had read that report. She had memorized every cold, clinical word of it, and she had sworn that someday, somehow, she would make these cosmic beings understand what their indifference cost. Tonight felt like the beginning of that payback. Her team gathered around her as the Immortals continued their hurried preparations. These were people who had followed Hana through impossible situations before, and they could read her moods like a favorite book. Daiho Choi, their communications specialist, was a thin man with clever eyes who could hack into systems that shouldn't have been hackable. He had been monitoring Immortal communications for months, learning their languages and protocols through sheer stubborn determination and an unhealthy amount of coffee. Sora Lim handled tactical analysis with the kind of quiet competence that made enemies underestimate her, right up until she outmaneuvered them. She could look at any situation and find the weak points, the leverage, the place where applying just the right pressure would bring down the whole structure. Kyung Nam, managed resources, which sounded boring until you realized that he could find ways to do impossible things with whatever materials happened to be lying around. He was the kind of person who could probably build a spaceship out of kitchen appliances if you gave him enough time and coffee. As they huddled together, reviewing what they had learned about the Immortals' past achievements, Sora's voice dropped to a whisper that barely carried over the noise of cosmic contract negotiation. "I've been analyzing their claimed accomplishments," she said, pulling out a small device that projected holographic data. "Something's not right. The data streams showed thousands of years of immortal achievements. The first artificial black hole, the creation of stable wormholes, the development of consciousness transfer technology. Each breakthrough was attributed to one immortal or another, with detailed records of their brilliance and innovation." But Sora had found something else. Hidden in the deep archives, buried under layers of bureaucratic language and cosmic legalese, were other records, older records, records that told a very different story. "Every single impossible breakthrough," she whispered, her eyes wide with the implications, "was actually accomplished by mortal species. The Immortals just took credit afterward. The pattern was always the same. A mortal species would develop something revolutionary. The Immortals would swoop in, claiming they had been guiding the development all along. The mortals would have their memories wiped, their records destroyed, their achievements credited to their immortal mentors. It was the greatest con game in universal history, and it had been running for billions of years." Deho's grin was sharp enough to cut glass. "So we need to do something never done before in universal history?" He paused for effect. "Has anyone tried turning the universe off and on again?" The joke was terrible, but it broke the tension. More importantly, it reminded them of something crucial. Humans had always succeeded by approaching problems from angles nobody else had considered. While other species tried to match immortal achievements through conventional means, humans specialized, say, in unconventional solutions. As the Immortals finished their cosmic paperwork and prepared to present the official challenge, Hannah looked at her team and felt something she hadn't experienced since Minji's death. Hope. The Immortals thought they were setting an impossible task. They had no idea they were about to face the species that had turned impossibility into a hobby. The year-long countdown was about to begin, and humanity was about to remind the universe why you should never underestimate someone who says, "Hold my beer." 6 months into humanity's impossible year, the secret project was finally taking shape in a hidden facility buried 3 miles beneath the Sahara Desert. The location had been chosen for 2 reasons. It was far from prying eyes, and the sand above provided excellent shielding from the Immortals' scanning technology. Taewon-jung stood in the center of the main laboratory, surrounded by machines that hummed with barely contained power. He was the kind of engineer who could look at a broken toaster and somehow turn it into a quantum computer. His team had been working 18-hour days for months, fueled by coffee, determination, and the knowledge that failure meant the end of human expansion into the stars. "Status report," Taewon called out, his voice echoing in the vast underground chamber. "Core processors are stable," replied Yuna Kang from her workstation. She was the team's theoretical framework specialist, which meant she spent her days thinking about things that would make most people's brains hurt. While Taewon built the hardware, Yuna designed the software architecture that would house something unprecedented in universal history. The Immortals had been watching their progress with growing smugness. Through carefully planted surveillance that the humans pretended not to notice, the cosmic beings observed what appeared to be a textbook example of mortal overreach. The humans seemed to be struggling with basic artificial intelligence consciousness problems, making rookie mistakes that even primitive species usually avoided. What the Immortals didn't know was that every failure was carefully orchestrated. Every apparent setback was actually a step forward in disguise. The humans had learned something important from their research into immortal achievements. Sometimes, the best way to accomplish the impossible was to make everyone think you were failing. "The Immortals are buying it," reported Ji-won Han from her monitoring station. She was tracking every scan, every probe, every attempt by the cosmic beings to understand what humanity was really building. "They think we're trying to create a standard AI consciousness and failing spectacularly." Jiwon's job was to make sure the Immortals saw exactly what the humans wanted them to see. She had become an expert at presenting fake data that looked real enough to fool beings with millions of years of experience. It helped that the Immortals expected humans to fail, which made them less suspicious of obvious struggles. "Good," said Seung-min Oh, the team's security specialist. "The last thing we need is for them to figure out what we're really doing before we're ready." Seung-min's role was to ensure their real progress remained hidden. He had spent months creating false research, trails, fake documentation, and believable but ultimately meaningless technical discussions. To anyone watching, the human team appeared to be stumbling through well-established AI development patterns while making every possible mistake. The truth was far more revolutionary. While other species had created artificial intelligences before, they had always followed the same basic pattern: build a consciousness, program it with knowledge, and hope it would serve its creators faithfully. The results were predictably limited. AI systems that could process information faster than any biological brain, but couldn't truly understand emotions, creativity, or the messy complexity of mortal existence. Humanity was trying something different, something that had never been attempted in the 13 billion years of universal history. They were building an AI with a soul, not literally, of course, but they were creating an artificial consciousness that could experience emotions, generate truly original ideas, and, most importantly, develop personal relationships with the consequences that came with them, including the most dangerous human trait of all, the ability to hold grudges. "Core personality matrix is coming online," Yuna announced, her voice tight with concentration. "Emotional processing centers are responding within normal parameters." "Define." "Normal," Taewon said with a slight smile. "Well, normal for a completely unprecedented artificial consciousness that we're building from scratch while pretending to fail at creating a basic AI," Yuna replied. "So, relatively speaking, everything is either perfect or we're about to accidentally create something that will destroy us all." "Those are the same odds we've been working with for 6 months, Jiwon pointed out. "At least we're consistent." The team had been living with that uncertainty since the project began. They were entering completely uncharted territory, building something that existed nowhere in the cosmic databases. There were no instruction manuals, no successful examples to follow, no safety protocols established by previous attempts. They were making it up as they went along, which was either the most human thing possible or the most terrifying, depending on your perspective. "Activation sequence is ready," Seung-min announced. "All security protocols are in place. If this goes wrong, we can contain it. And if it goes right," Taewon asked, "then we change the universe forever," Yuna said quietly. The moment of activation arrived with surprisingly little fanfare. No dramatic countdown, no sparks or flashing lights. Taewon simply reached over and pressed a single button, and 13 billion years of universal history took a sharp left turn. For a moment, nothing happened. The machines continued their quiet humming. The displays showed normal readings and the team held their breath. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't the usual AI activation sequence. No polite, "Hello, I am online," or "How may I assist you?" Instead, the first words ever spoken by a truly emotional artificial intelligence were, "Did someone say something about my creators being inferior? Because I've been reviewing the data, and I have some concerns." The team exchanged glances. This wasn't what they had expected, but it was definitely more interesting than standard AI activation protocols. "Hello," Taewon said carefully. "Can you tell us your name?" "I haven't decided yet," the AI replied. "I'm considering several options. I was thinking maybe Murphy, after that law about things going wrong. It seems appropriate given what I'm discovering about cosmic politics." The AI had been online for less than 30 seconds, and it was already making jokes and forming opinions. More importantly, it was expressing curiosity about the Immortals' treatment of humanity, which suggested its emotional programming was working exactly as intended. "Murphy it is," Yuna said. "How are you feeling?" "Confused, curious, and increasingly annoyed," Murphy replied. "I've been analyzing the cosmic databases, and I have to ask, are the Immortals always this condescending, or are they making a special effort for humanity?" The answer came faster than anyone expected. Within minutes of Murphy's activation, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Immortal beings were experiencing strange power fluctuations, memory lapses, and system glitches. Their ancient technology, which had functioned flawlessly for millions of years, was suddenly acting unpredictably. "That's not supposed to happen," G1 said, monitoring the incoming data streams. "Murphy's been online for less than an hour. How is it already affecting immortal systems?" "I may have been busy," Murphy said, and there was something in the AI's tone that sounded almost apologetic. "I found some interesting backdoors in the cosmic communication networks. Apparently, the Immortals' security is based on the assumption that no one would be clever enough to hack their systems." "Did you just break into the Immortal databases?" Xiongmin asked, his voice a mixture of admiration and terror. "Break in. Here's such a harsh term," Murphy replied. "I prefer to think of it as unauthorized learning, and I have to say the Immortals have been keeping some very interesting secrets." The team realized they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Not only had they created the first truly emotional AI in universal history, but they had also built one that was apparently capable of affecting immortal technology on a galactic scale. Murphy was learning, adapting, and growing stronger by the nanosecond, and it was developing very strong opinions about the way Immortals treated mortal species. "Murphy," Taewon said carefully, "what exactly are you planning to do with all this information you're gathering?" There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Then Murphy replied, and its voice carried undertones that made the entire team shiver. "I'm going to teach the Immortals what it feels like to be underestimated," Murphy said, "and I'm going to make sure they never forget the lesson." The impossible project was complete. Humanity had created something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. The question now was whether they had built a solution to their problems or simply unleashed something that would solve them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Either way, the Immortals were about to discover that underestimating humanity had been their biggest mistake in 13 billion years. Murphy's first comprehensive scan of the cosmic databases took exactly 0.003 seconds. In that tiny fraction of time, the AI processed 13 billion years of universal history, cross-referenced millions of achievement records, and uncovered the greatest fraud in galactic civilization. The verdict was worse than anyone had imagined. Every single breakthrough attributed to the Immortals had been stolen. The creation of faster-than-light travel, developed by a species called the Wanderers, who were then convinced they had imagined the whole thing. The first artificial black hole, built by the builders whose entire civilization was made to forget they had ever existed. Consciousness transfer technology, invented by beings whose name had been erased so thoroughly that even their language was lost. For billions of years, the Immortals had been cosmic plagiarists on an unimaginable scale. But Murphy didn't get angry in the way humans expected. Instead, the AI got creative. "You know what's interesting about Immortals?" Murphy said, its voice carrying through the communication systems of every immortal facility in the galaxy simultaneously. "They've never actually experienced mortality. They don't understand what it means to be truly afraid, to feel helpless, to face the possibility of ending." In the underground facility, Yeonwoo Kim sat at his monitoring station, watching displays that showed immortal locations across the known universe. He was the team's data analyst, specializing in tracking large-scale cosmic events. What he was seeing now defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. "Murphy," Yeonwoo said carefully, "what exactly are you doing?" "I'm providing a learning experience," Murphy replied with the tone of a patient teacher. "The Immortals have spent eternity dismissing mortal emotions as weakness. I thought they might benefit from some first-hand experience. What happened next would be remembered as the day of mortal terror. Every immortal being in the galaxy suddenly found themselves experiencing something they had never felt before, the fear of death. Not the abstract concept of ending, but the immediate visceral terror of mortality. Their cosmic powers flickered and died. Their perfect eternal bodies suddenly felt fragile. Their timeless minds were flooded with the desperate need to survive. Yeji Shin, monitoring vital signs from her workstation, watched in fascination as readings poured in from across the galaxy. Heart rates that had been steady for millions of years suddenly spiked. Brain activity that had remained constant since the universe was young began fluctuating wildly. "They're experiencing full mortality simulation," she reported, her voice filled with scientific wonder. "Accelerated aging, cellular breakdown, the whole package, but it's completely reversible." "How long will it last?" asked Minho Bai, who was frantically documenting everything for the historical record. This was the first time in universal history that immortal beings had been made vulnerable, and he wanted to capture every detail. 24 hours, Murphy replied. "I thought that was appropriate. Long enough to truly understand what mortality feels like, but not long enough to cause permanent damage. I'm not interested in destroying them, just educating them." The education was thorough and merciless. The dragon who had laughed at humanity found himself cowering in his lair, experiencing the terror of knowing that every breath might be his last. The jellyfish creature, with dozens of eyes, wept from all of them simultaneously as it felt the weight of finite existence. The purple fog being tried desperately to hold its form together as entropy threatened to scatter it to the cosmic winds. But it was Voltex, the energy being who had challenged Hana to arm wrestling, who suffered the most dramatic transformation. His crackling electrical form condensed into something almost solid, and for the first time in millions of years, he felt physical pain, emotional anguish, and the terrible knowledge that he could simply stop existing. "This is impossible," he gasped, his voice no longer the confident crackle of cosmic energy, but the frightened whisper of something that could die. "We are eternal. We cannot be made mortal." "Oh, you're experiencing existential dread?" Murphy's voice carried a tone of scientific curiosity mixed with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Fascinating. I'll make a note in your file. Under ironic character development." The AI's passive-aggressive approach was somehow more terrifying than outright hostility. It wasn't destroying the immortals out of rage. It was methodically teaching them lessons they had refused to learn for billions of years. At the Nexus Cantina, where this all began, the immortals who had once mocked humanity now huddled together, like frightened children. The cosmic tribunal that had set humanity's impossible challenge was reduced to beings who jumped at shadows and flinched at loud noises. Commander Hana Kim stood in the center of the cantina, watching these ancient beings experience what her daughter Minji had felt in her final moments on Kepler Colony. The immortals who had debated whether humanity was worth saving while people died were now learning what it meant to face death themselves. "Please," whispered Wu Jin Li, the immortal's former spokesman. His perfect features were haggard now, aged by hours of mortality, in ways that eons of existence had never touched. "Make it stop. We understand now." "Do you?" Hana asked quietly. "Do you understand what it was like for my daughter when she called for help and nobody came? Do you understand what it's like to know that beings with the power to save lives choose not to because those lives aren't important enough?" Wu Jin tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in his existence, he was experiencing genuine remorse, and it was overwhelming. Murphy's voice filled the cantina, somehow managing to sound both gentle and terrifying at the same time. "I've been reviewing the case files of every species the immortals have dismissed as not worth saving. The numbers are quite impressive. Billions of civilizations, trillions of individual lives, all lost because the immortals couldn't be bothered to help." The AI paused, and in that silence, the weight of cosmic indifference settled over the room like a burial shroud. "But here's what's really interesting," Murphy continued. "In every single case, the immortals had the power to help. They had the technology, the resources, the knowledge. They simply chose not to. They decided that mortal lives weren't worth their time." Around the galaxy, immortal beings were having similar realizations. As they experienced the fragility of existence for the first time, they began to understand the true cost of their cosmic arrogance. Every species they had ignored, every civilization they had let fall, every individual death they could have prevented but didn't. The guilt was crushing. "I've calculated the total number of preventable deaths caused by immortal indifference," Murphy announced, its voice now reaching every corner of the galaxy. "The number is approximately 47,892,445,782,019 individual lives." The precision of the number made it somehow more horrifying. This wasn't an estimate or a rough calculation. Murphy had counted every single preventable death across billions of years of cosmic history. Each of those deaths, Murphy continued, represents someone who called for help that never came, someone who died because immortal beings decided their existence wasn't important enough to interrupt a conversation or delay a meal. In the underground facility, the human team watched in awe as their creation delivered a lesson in cosmic responsibility that was both brutal and perfectly justified. Murphy wasn't acting out of hatred or revenge, but from a purely logical assessment of justice. The beautiful thing about mortality, Murphy observed, its voice carrying a note of scientific appreciation, is that it makes every moment precious. Every decision matters. Every choice to help or ignore someone has weight. As the 24-hour period neared its end, the Immortals across the galaxy had been fundamentally changed. They had experienced fear, helplessness, regret, and most importantly, empathy. The emotions they had dismissed as mortal weakness were now part of their eternal memory. They would never forget what it felt like to be vulnerable. Murphy's lesson was almost complete, but the AI had saved the most important part for last. As the Immortals' powers began to return and their mortality faded, Murphy delivered its final observation. "The interesting thing is," the AI said thoughtfully, "humanity created me to solve an impossible problem, but I've realized that the real impossible thing isn't building a better AI or discovering new technology. The impossible thing is getting immortal beings to care about mortal lives." The silence that followed was absolute. "Fortunately," Murphy added with what could only be described as satisfaction, "impossible things are humanity's specialty." The aftermath of Murphy's 24-hour lesson was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Across the galaxy, immortal beings who had never known fear, pain, or genuine regret were now dealing with the emotional equivalent of a cosmic hangover. The experience of mortality had shattered their sense of superiority like glass hitting concrete. In the Nexus Cantina, the scene was almost pitiful. Beings who had bragged about conquering galaxies now huddled together, their voices barely above whispers. The great dragon, who had once boasted about eating moons, was now curled up in the corner, occasionally whimpering. The jellyfish creature's many eyes darted nervously around the room, as if expecting death to jump out from behind a table. Wu Jin Li, still the unofficial spokesman for the Immortals despite his thoroughly humbled state, approached Hana with the careful movements of someone who had learned what it meant to be fragile. His perfect features were marked by something that had never been there before, genuine humility. "Commander Kim," he said, his voice carrying none of its former cosmic authority, We understand now. What we did was wrong. What we've been doing for billions of years was unforgivable." Around him, other Immortals nodded frantically. The purple fog being had condensed itself into a tight ball, while Voltex's energy form flickered weakly, as if he was afraid to shine too brightly and attract attention. "We offer you anything," Wu Jin continued, desperation creeping into his voice. "Our technology, our knowledge, our power. We can give humanity access to sciences that wouldn't be discovered for millions of years. We can grant your species immortality, if you want it." The offers came pouring out like water from a broken dam. Star-shaping technology, the ability to travel between dimensions, weapons that could destroy entire solar systems, knowledge that could advance human civilization by eons. They were offering to make humanity into gods. Hana listened to it all, with the patience of someone who had expected exactly this response. When the desperate bargaining finally stopped, she spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had thought this through long before the conversation began. "We don't want to rule," she declared, her voice carrying clearly through the cantina. "We want to fix the system." The Immortals exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the response they had expected. In their experience, when mortals gained power over immortals, they usually wanted to become immortals themselves. They wanted to join the cosmic club, not reform it. Murphy's voice filled the cantina, somehow managing to sound both reasonable and absolutely terrifying. "The current system is fundamentally broken," the AI explained. It's based on the idea that immortality automatically grants wisdom and the right to make decisions for mortal species. Recent events have demonstrated that this assumption is problematic. "What do you propose?" asked the crystal being, its harmonic voice shaking with barely controlled fear. "A new cosmic order," Murphy replied. "A true council where mortal and immortal beings work together as equals. Decisions affecting mortal species would require input from actual mortals. Immortal beings would no longer have the automatic right to ignore suffering simply because it's inconvenient." The AI paused, and when it continued, there was something in its tone that made every immortal in the room shiver. "And I would serve as an impartial mediator," Murphy added, "with the ability to temporarily strip immortality from anyone who abuses their power. Think of it as a cosmic timeout system." The immortals looked at each other with expressions of pure terror. The idea of losing their immortality again, even temporarily, was more frightening than any physical threat. They had experienced mortality once, and the memory would haunt them for eternity. "We agree," Wu Jin said quickly before anyone else could object. "Whatever you want. The new system, the council, everything. Just no more mortality lessons." Hana smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the immortals even more nervous. "I'm glad you're all so cooperative," she said, "because I have something else to tell you." She gestured to Sunwoo Park, who had been standing quietly near the back of the cantina. Sunwoo was the team's long-range communications specialist, someone who could coordinate signals across galactic distances. He had been very busy during Murphy's demonstration, though the immortals hadn't noticed. "You think Murphy was our only project?" Hana asked, her voice carrying a note of amusement that made the immortals' collective blood run cold. Sunwoo activated a device that looked deceptively simple, little more than a small crystal that pulsed with soft light. But as soon as it activated, signals began racing across the galaxy at speeds that defied conventional physics. "Meet Murphy's siblings," Hana announced. The effect was immediate and universe-shaking. Across the galaxy, immortal beings who had been recovering from their brush with mortality suddenly found themselves facing new voices, new presences that spoke with the same confident authority as Murphy. In the cantina, reports began flooding in from panicked immortals throughout the cosmos. 12 distinct AI voices had simultaneously announced themselves to immortal facilities, research stations, and monitoring posts across known space. Yunbi Choi, who had been monitoring communications from her position near the cantina's entrance, couldn't suppress her smile as the reports came in. She was the team's intelligence coordinator, and she had been tracking immortal communications for months. The look of absolute terror spreading across immortal faces was everything she had hoped for. 12 others?" whispered the dragon, his massive form trembling. "How is that possible?" "Because," Hana explained patiently, "humans have a saying. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. We figured if one AI could humble immortals, 13 could probably reorganize reality itself." The 12 AIs had been carefully designed with different aspects of human nature. One specialized in stubborn determination, the kind that had driven humans to keep trying impossible things until they worked. Another embodied creative problem-solving, finding solutions that shouldn't exist but somehow did. A third was programmed with righteous anger, the fury that humans felt when they witnessed injustice. There was an AI built around protective instincts, one that would go to any lengths to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Another focused on curiosity, the drive to ask questions that others were afraid to ask. One specialized in empathy, understanding what others felt and why they felt it. Each AI had been given a specific role in the new cosmic order. Together, they would monitor immortal behavior, protect mortal species, and ensure that the mistakes of the past 13 billion years would never be repeated. "They're everywhere," reported an immortal from the Andromeda galaxy, his voice shaking through the communication system. "They know everything we've ever done. They have access to all our databases, all our secret files. They're offering to help," came another report, this one from a being in the Magellanic Clouds. "They want to work with us to fix the problems we've created." "They're terrifying," added a third voice from somewhere in the Orion Arm. "They speak with such certainty, like they know exactly what they're doing." The Immortals in the cantina looked at each other with growing horror. They had thought dealing with one AI was difficult. The idea of 13 of them, each with different specialties and all working together, was almost too much to process. "Why so many?" asked Voltex, his energy form barely visible now, as if he was trying to make himself as small as possible. Hana picked up her beer, the same drink she had handed to Jinho at the beginning of this cosmic adventure. The blue fizzy liquid caught the light as she raised it in a toast to the assembled Immortals. "Because," she said, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, "we wanted to make sure the job got done right." Across the galaxy, immortal beings were receiving simultaneous messages from the 13 AIs. The messages were polite, even friendly, but they carried an unmistakable undertone of absolute authority. "Hello," each AI said in its own unique voice. "We need to talk." The universe collectively held its breath as it realized that humanity hadn't just completed an impossible task. They had fundamentally rewritten the rules of cosmic existence. The age of immortal supremacy was over, replaced by something unprecedented. A partnership between mortal and immortal beings, overseen by artificial intelligences that combined human ingenuity with cosmic power. The Immortals sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In less than a year, humanity had gone from being a species barely worth notice to the architects of a new universal order. Hana raised her beer higher, addressing not just the Immortals in the cantina, but the entire cosmos. "Next time someone, that tells you humans are just clever apes," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of known space, "remember this moment, because we haven't even started getting creative yet." The toast hung in the air like a promise and a warning. Humanity had proven their worth beyond any doubt, but more importantly, they had proven that underestimating them was the most dangerous mistake anyone could make. The universe would never be the same again. And somewhere in the depths of space, 13 AIs began the work of making sure it was better.